أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قال إني عبد الله آتاني الكتاب وجعلني نبيا وجعلني مباركا أينما كنت وأوصاني بالصلاة والزكاة ما دمت حيا وبرا بوالدتي ولم يجعلني جبارا شقيا ذلك عيسى ابن مريم والسلام علي يوم ولدت ويوم أموت ويوم أبعث حيا ذلك عيسى ابن مريم قول الحق الذي فيه يمترون. Sayyiduna Isa alayhi salatu wassalam's words from the arms of his mother, from the cradle as an infant. قال إني عبد الله, he said, I am the servant of Allah. آتاني الكتاب, he gave me the book. وجعلني نبيا, and he made me a prophet. وأوصاني بالصلاة والزكاة ما دمت حيا وجعلني مباركا أينما كنت, and he made me blessed wherever I am. وأوصاني بالصلاة والزكاة ما دمت حيا, and he instructed me to perform salah and to give zakat for as long as I live. وبرا بوالدتي, and to be dutiful to my mother. ولم يجعلني جبارا شقيا, and he didn't make me arrogant, unfortunate. والسلام علي يوم ولدت, and peace upon me the day I was born. ويوم أموت, and the day I'll die. ويوم أبعث حيا, and the day I'll be resurrected alive. ذلك عيسى ابن مريم, that is Isa, son of Maryam. قول الحق, the word of truth. الذي فيه يمترون, in which they argue. So to continue from where we left off yesterday, Isa alayhi salatu wassalam was instructed to perform salah and give zakah, or the second interpretation is he was instructed to command the people. He was given the command of salah and zakah for himself, or by extension for his people. And zakah means charity and giving from your wealth, and it means purity as well. وَبَرًّا بِوَالِدَتِي, and he made me dutiful to my mother. Here's an indication from Isa alayhi salatu wasalam from the cradle that there is no father in the picture at all, that he's been created without a father, that his birth is a miracle too, that it's a sign of Allah. وَبَرًّا بِوَالِدَتِي, and this is a powerful defense for his mother, that I will be kind to my mother. I am a child whose creation is a miracle. It's a manifestation of the qudra of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's an extraordinary event, and I will grow up to serve my mother and to be dutiful to her. وَبَرًّا بِوَالِدَتِي وَلَمْ يَجْعَلْنِي جَبَّارًا شَقِيًّا, and he didn't make me arrogant. He didn't make me a tyrant. The implication here is that some children are tyrants for their parents. And shaqiyya, unfortunate. The implication here is that the person who is a tyrant before his parents is unfortunate and wretched. And we went through the section on Yahya alayhi salam earlier, in which Allah gave the good news to Zakaria alayhi salatu wassalam, and there, with reference to the attributes of Yahya alayhi salam, similar words are used. وَلَمْ يَكُنْ جَبَّارًا عَصِيًّا, he wasn't a tyrant, disobedient. There the words are disobedient, عَصِيًّا, and here shaqiyya. So if we put this together, what do we get? We get the picture of what pious children are supposed to be like. How are pious children supposed to be towards their parents? Now, we've touched on some aspects of this when we were talking about Yahya alayhi salam. There are some aspects which I wish to touch on today, and there'll be some overlap perhaps. The reality of the situation is that this is very important, this whole ruling, this area of discussion. So I want to mention the financial obligations here of children towards their parents. I'm talking about adult children. And so let us understand, we talk about zakat and the people you can spend it on. So who can you not spend it on? From your relatives, you can spend your zakat on your own brothers and sisters if they are needy. And you can spend it on your own uncles and aunties, both paternal and maternal. Your father's brothers and sisters and your mother's brothers and sisters. You can spend zakat on your cousins and all of these blood relatives. If you spend your zakat on them, if you give it to them because they are deserving and needy, you will get a double reward. And this is the preferred place to spend it, because you are on the one hand paying your zakat, and on the other hand you are strengthening the relationship of kith and kin, your blood ties. And this is an obligation in Islam. Now, this doesn't mean that you make it obvious that it's zakat money. Quite the opposite. It should be presented as a gift so as not to embarrass the person. However, the ones you can't give it to from your relatives are your own parents and grandparents and great-grandparents, all the way up. And your own children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, all the way down. Your usul and your furu, your roots and your offspring. And the reason for this is that they are your responsibility anyway. Spouses cannot spend on each other. They can't give their zakat on each other, shall we say. Because the breadwinner of the family has to spend on his partner anyway. And if she is wealthy and she pays it to him, it's going to come back to her because they're going to share some aspect of it. So there's a conflict of interest here. So it can't be spent on each other. Yes, a spouse can give sadaqah to their partner if they're in need. That's a separate point. A spouse can spend on their partner when they're in need and get the reward of sadaqah. They can't give zakat to each other, husbands and wives. So, your usul and your furu. Now, it's an obvious point, isn't it, that parents spend on their own children. You look after your children until they come of age and they become independent, and you continue to spend on them during this time, their infancy, their adolescence. This is the norm, isn't it? But what we forget is that our parents are also entitled if they are needy. And this is from our wajib nafaqah, our iyal. The word iyal is used in Arabic for your financial dependence. And the word nafaqah is used for your expenses, the costs that you have, living costs, and who they are due to. So just as it is necessary for parents, it's then an obligation to spend on their children. It becomes an obligation for parents who are wealthier than their parents. Adults, if you have parents and you are wealthy and they are needy, it becomes your obligation. And when I say wealthy here, let me be clear. I'm not even talking about the stage where you have to give zakat, because you don't give zakat to your parents. Look, let's come back to the initial point, step by step. If you have children and you are not wealthy and you do not give zakat because there's no obligation on you to give zakat, and you don't even have savings, you live on a day-to-day basis, what you earn you spend, it's still wajib on you to spend on your children, naturally. If you are poor, you still buy clothes for your children. You still buy food for your children. Of course, you may not be able to buy as much as you want to, or the quality that you want to, but the poor parent also spends on his or her child. That's your obligation. The fact that you are poor and beneath the poverty threshold doesn't mean that you only eat yourself and don't feed your children. You share with them what you have. In fact, as many parents will do naturally, they will sacrifice their own need for their children. And there are plenty of examples in the world today, and historically this doesn't change. And this is because it's not just your desire as a parent, it's your obligation to fend for your children. Now, what we forget is, as Muslims, what we need to remember is, if our parents are needy, we have to spend on them even if we are not wealthy, and even if we don't give zakat. So if we are people who have to give zakat annually because we have such savings, then of course the responsibility will only become greater. So if our parents are needy then we ought to spend on them. It's our obligation. They are part of our iyal, and our nafaqah is due to them. And we are answerable if we don't. And so, if your parents are suffering because of financial problems, you become sinful. So this is a point to understand. And so the implication here is that your parents in the Islamic family system, they shouldn't have to rely on pensions. They shouldn't have to rely on state benefits. You should be there for them. If that provision is there for them, alhamdulillah. But the point is, see, I'm mentioning this in the context of a time in which the welfare state, not just in the United Kingdom, but around the world, wherever there is such a provision, this is coming towards, it's heading towards a collapse. It's not something which is sustainable in the long term. With the numbers that we have in our communities around the world, nation states are no longer able to support the elderly in the way that they might have. Now, from an Islamic point of view, this responsibility is on the shoulders of the children, on the shoulders of the children. And they are supposed to look after their parents both financially and physically as well. And therefore, the need for homes shouldn't be there in a society, in a community, a religious community in which children recognize this obligation. It should be considered to be an honor to look after your parents. And of course, aside from the costs which would be alleviated from the state, this pressure, the point here is it's a practical approach where when you are small and young, your parents look after you, and when they grow old and infirm, you look after them. And alhamdulillah, not just in Muslim society, but beyond that, there are many here and around the world who have these types of values. So this is the ideal situation. Now, what happens is, if we sort of proceed on this point, as people grow older, they can become unreasonable, set in their ways, grumpy, and stubborn. And sometimes people may go into a state of, they may become senile, they may begin to lose their memory, and as a consequence, they need to be looked after like children. And that's where the humbleness comes in, which is mentioned in so many ways in the Quran. When you look after your parents and you serve them, you need to be humble. You need to be able to bite your tongue, not literally, meaning hold your mouth and not respond to them if they are behaving in a way which is frustrating for you. They're testing your patience. Remember, you tested theirs when you were a baby, and now the tables have turned, and it's your turn. It's your turn to serve them. There's an old story in English storybooks, and there's some wisdom in it, so I'll just quickly relate it to you. It's of the parents who lived with their children and their own parents. And as the grandfather of the household grew elderly, he would drool and he would spill his food, and the spoon, the cutlery would fall from his hands, and he would make a mess in the kitchen. And so the couple decided to build a shed outside in the garden where they would keep him and where they would feed him. And so the children observed this, and the parents put their elderly parent into this shed, and this becomes his new bedsit, and he's given his food there. Now, these very small children learn from example. One day, the children found the little son, he's playing with some pieces of wood, and he's trying to make something. And daddy comes along and says, and he says to the child, he says, what are you doing? He says, Daddy, I'm building a shed. He says, what for? He says, when you grow old, so I can put you there. And of course, what daddy does is his eyes swell with tears, and he brings his own daddy back into the house. And that's what happens in reality. Kama tudinu tudanu. If you don't look after your own, then when your turn comes, remember, if anything, as we move towards Qiyamah, we see the value system being watered down. And so you can't expect what you gave, and if you fall short of what you can give to your elders, you may get even less as a return when your turn comes. So the looking after parents, now the problem arises on two levels. One is when there's a personality clash between parents and children. I'm talking about adult children, and they don't get along together. And the second arises when families come into play, and we have extended families. So there are grandchildren and there are spouses. So what do you do in this situation? So let's explore a couple of situations. One situation is that you live with your parents and your wife and children. You live with your spouse, your children, and you live with your parents under the same roof. This is one scenario. And the other scenario is that you live outside of the house. This isn't about your own family problems or challenges as an extended family. That's a separate subject. We're focusing on looking after your parents when there are other challenges. So for example, if your spouse doesn't approve of your parents, or they don't approve of your spouse, whether you live under the same roof or under a separate roof, there are some considerations to remember. And so this does not mean, it doesn't justify you oppressing either. So only because your spouse, hypothetically, if we're talking about a male and his wife, if your wife doesn't get on with your parents, or your parents don't get on with your wife, this doesn't mean that you, as the middleman, now you become unbiased towards the one at the expense of the other and at the expense of good sense and justice. So to embarrass your parents in front of your spouse is very, very unethical. To scold them, very inappropriate, because they may have said something. So you come home and you're told by your wife, or you know what your mum said today, what your dad said today, and so you storm out of the room in a mood, and you say something to your parent. This isn't the response that should be there. You should be the sponge. You should be the sponge. You should listen to her so she can, you know, if she's frustrated and she's stressed, you listen to her and help to sort of ease her emotional condition and give her some moral support. But you don't respond in this way, reactionary. Similarly, in this, you come home and your parent complains. So listen to them. Now don't embarrass your wife in front of them. You have to play this tightrope, and this is part and parcel of life. And so what happens, you take it on the chest and you listen to both, and you don't take too much, if you know, you don't become a reactionary. And of course there may be times when some sensible intervention has to happen, but this doesn't mean that you can turn against one at the expense of the other, because you can't leave your parents. They are, when I say leave, abandon them. You can't do that. You can't sever the relationship, whether you live with them or not. That's a separate discussion. And your wife is your wife, and she has her rights. And in today's world, when parents can often be unreasonable, ulama say it's not justified for you to divorce your wife because your parents are unreasonably demanding this from you. If they're demanding this from you unreasonably, they are in the wrong, and you don't need to destroy your marriage and family life because of that. And these are the problems. So what does this mean? So what I'm saying here is these things exist in society, and this is normal. It's not unique to our communities and societies. It's not unique to Muslims. The whole sort of problems with extended families exist in humanity generally. So what do you have to do? You have to walk on the tightrope. You have to manage all of those relationships. And so what I'm saying today, in the context of the verses we're discussing, is that these problems should never prevent you from serving your parents and doing their khidmah. So only because mum and wife don't get on, for example, and it could be, you can flip the coin and have a different kind of scenario, it doesn't mean that the son now neglects either. So you continue to serve your parents. Now, how is this done? Whether you live under the same roof or under a separate roof, if you live separately too, there's plenty you can do. It's about keeping in touch, and it's about visiting, and it's about assisting with chores and errands, serving your parents. So this can be, for example, it might be going to the chemist for them, taking them to their appointments if they have health problems, taking them out as well, sometimes traveling with them if that's what they require, or which will be a way of offering khidmah to them. It may be doing their shopping, mowing their lawn, helping them with housework, etc. So whatever the context, but the point is, this khidmah can and should exist with humbleness despite any personality clashes. Don't wait for a time where your parents are going to become perfect. In fact, that's what the test is. This is where the humbleness comes in. This is where the modesty comes in, where biting remarks have to sometimes be listened to, and you think they're completely out of proportion. Doesn't matter, just swallow it. And if you keep your intention good and make your best effort, inshallah, you'll be rewarded for that. And you'll be rewarded with maghfirah and Jannah. It's a very major opportunity to get into Jannah. Now, sometimes our tests are of this sort, the bigger tests. Sometimes a person is tested because of their health. Sometimes a person is tested because of their financial situation. Sometimes a person is tested in one way, sometimes another. So what is your door to Allah's pleasure? Well, it may be your parents. And so this is something to keep in mind. So it should be considered an honor. And it should be considered a virtue. And it should be something you should not be abashed about. If your friends see you with your parents out shopping or walking or whatever it may be, it's perfectly fine. It's not something to be embarrassed about. And this applies to younger people as well. Teenagers sometimes don't want to be seen by their friends with their parents. So what? What's wrong with that? They have parents and you do. And you should be proud of your parents, whatever they are, whoever they are. Alhamdulillah. And these are your parents, and it doesn't matter if the world sees you with your parents. So show your parents respect in front of your friends, and your friends will learn a lesson from you. Not the other way around. Showing respect to your friends at the expense of your parents. So there's an anecdote here which I'll relate to you. Of a son who met his school friends, and he was with his dad, and he was embarrassed to say that it's his dad, that my friends will see my dad. So he says to his friends, this is my dad's friend. And the father, being a witty person, turns to the friends of his son, says, no, I'm not his dad's friend, I'm his mum's friend. So basically, the idea that we need to sort of grow out of this. So وَبَرًّا بِوَالِدَتِي, this is the sifa, the quality of the Anbiya alayhimus salatu wassalam. So it's something which we need to follow in their example, in their footsteps, and this is the lesson that we need to learn. So وَبَرًّا بِوَالِدَتِي. Now just one more point here, which is sometimes what happens is parents grow old and pass away, and children have not taken the opportunity to serve them. So what can they do now? How can you make up for the lost opportunities? So don't wait for the lost opportunity. Don't wait for this to happen. If they're alive, use every opportunity to engage with them. But if they've passed away, can you do anything? Yes, you can. You can now essentially make up for the lost khidmah, opportunities of serving your parents, by making lots of dua for them, by sadaqah jariyah on their behalf, and by maintaining a positive relationship with their friends. You see, you are rewarded for the honor that you maintain for your parents' reputation, their reputation which you maintain after they pass away. In one hadith, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Inna abarral birri silatur rajuli ahla wuddi akhihi abihi ba'da an tawalla al-ab." Aw kama qala alayhi salatu wasalam. Indeed, the greatest form of piety is for a person to maintain ties with the friends of his father after his father has gone. So your parent has passed away. And this is why Sayyidina Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu, once he was traveling and he met a man and he dismounted for him and he removed his imama for him and gave it to him. And I say Ibn Umar was a scholar in his time when he grew up in Medina Munawwara, and he was a very pious senior person from amongst the Sahaba when he grew up in that generation. He was a child in the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So he was asked, he says, why did you show so much respect to this elderly man passing by? He says, he was my dad's friend. So this point of maintaining, say the Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, talking about people's friends after they pass away, say the Khadija radiallahu anha passes away. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he would sacrifice a goat, an animal, he would send meat to her friends. Just because they were her friends, to show respect to that friendship which they had with his wife. So when people pass away, when you show respect, you stop by to say salam to the uncle G, to the auntie G, to your parents' friends. What happens? They'll talk about your father, they'll talk about your mother, and they'll do so in a positive way, and they'll make dua for you, and they'll make dua for your parent, and this will lead to Allah's pleasure, and that's something which is desirable. So Islam is not a dry religion. Islam is not just about our ibadat, our salah, sawm, hajj, zakah. Islam is about much, much more. And this human touch is fully the fabric of Islam. It's not something which is separate or an extra. So, وَبَرًّا بِوَالِدَتِي. Isa alayhi salam says, and he made me dutiful to my mother, وَلَمْ يَجْعَلْنِي جَبَّارًا شَقِيًّا. And he didn't make me arrogant, unfortunate. How we've time?
25 minutes.
وَالسَّلَامُ عَلَيَّ يَوْمَ وُلِدْتُ, and peace upon me the day I was born. وَيَوْمَ أَمُوتُ, and the day I will die. وَيَوْمَ أُبْعَثُ حَيًّا, and the day I'll be resurrected alive. As we mentioned, when similar words are mentioned in the Quran with reference to Isa alayhi salatu wasalam, these are the three very, very sort of intense moments. When a person is born, do they survive or not? It's a time of danger. Does the mother survive? Does the child survive? And the other thing that happens is Shaitan, he annoys every child that is born. And that's why children cry. It's mentioned in hadith. When they're born, they begin to cry. Of course, it's a sign of life. But the point is that happens, the provocation comes from Shaitan. And so their physical and spiritual safety. And then when you are leaving the dunya, when a person is in the throes of death, the pangs of death, and the which they call death rattle, when the chest begins to heave, وَالْتَفَّتِ السَّاقُ بِالسَّاقِ, and the legs fly up and down because of the agitation of the dying person. What happens at this point? So, does this person leave with Iman? Or is Shaitan successful in snatching the gem of Iman and Kalima away from this person? So this is another very momentous, the event of a person's life, the way they leave. How do they leave? And the third is when the graves will split and people will rise from their graves in a state of terror. And those who hadn't believed when they were alive in this dunya, they'll be in a state of astonishment. And those who did, they'll recognize that Allah has wakened them up from their graves and now they have to head for the Hashr. But this will be another event, a momentous event of fear and terror and intensity. And so someone who has safety and peace on all three occasions is safe from everything else which is lesser. So Isa alayhi salatu wassalam, wassalamu alayya, is saying peace upon me when I was born. Shaitan didn't afflict me, didn't touch me. And in other words, all through my life too, I'm being received in this dunya with Allah's rahmah and mercy. And when I die, I'll leave safely, and that's yet to happen as we learn further in the durus. Isa alayhi salam is alive and he will descend to the earth before Qiyamah, and after living on the earth for some time he'll pass away. And the detail of that will come to inshallah. And when Isa alayhi salam is resurrected on the day of Qiyamah. Now he has a special connection with this ummah, does Isa alayhi salam. Again, that's another element we'll come to. But right now what I want to just mention today before we close is that in making this statement, وَالسَّلَامُ عَلَيَّ يَوْمَ وُلِدْتُ وَيَوْمَ أَمُوتُ وَيَوْمَ أُبْعَثُ حَيًّا, Isa alayhi salatu wasalam is actually also defending himself and his mother from the accusations which are being made against them both. And so he's saying that I'm free from this, and if I'm free from your accusations which you will make in the future, then my mother is free as well. Because if they were true for my mother, this would be a source of suffering for me, and this would be this would be a torment for me as well. So what are they accusing Maryam alayhi salam of? Well, as you remember, they're accusing of being unchaste. And later, Banu Israel splits into two groups. There's the one that follows Isa alayhi salam and accepts him as the prophet that's now been sent to Banu Israel, and the other group refuses and rejects him. So you have two extremes. On the one hand, you have the group which accuses Isa alayhi salam of being a liar, a sorcerer, and an impostor. When they see his miracles, they say that this is sorcery and magic. And they also accuse his mother of being unchaste and of having conceived Isa alayhi salatu wasalam out of sin. So this is one group, one extreme. And the other group, after Isa alayhi salatu wasalam is raised into the heavens, they themselves divide into various groups. So one group says that he is God incarnate. He's God himself. He came to earth and went back. He came in human form. And the second group says he's the Son of God. And the third group says he's one of three, the Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. And the fourth says that he is a human being and a servant of Allah, and this is the one that is on Tawheed. So there are various groups, so there are extremes on both ends. Those who attack the reputation of Isa alayhi salam and his mother, and there are those who praise him and his mother such that they take him and his mother to a level of divinity. Both are extremes on the spectrum. And so when Isa alayhi salam says wassalamu alayya, he's deflecting all of this which is happening and which is to happen. Wassalamu alayya yawma wulidtu wa yawma amutu wa yawma ub'athu hayya. And Allah Ta'ala says, ذَلِكَ Isa ibn Maryam, that is Isa bin Maryam, Isa son of Maryam, قَوْلَ الْحَقِّ, a word of truth, الَّذِي فِيهِ يَمْتَرُونَ, in which they differ and argue. And that's all for today. وَآخِرُ دَعْوَانَا الْحَمْدُ لِلَّهِ رَبِّ الْعَالَمِينَ.